So today we're focusing on AI pilot fatigue, which has become a dreaded new drain on valuable time, energy, and resources for many companies. That's all true for those in the private equity space. AI is poised to be the new engine of value creation, accelerating deal sourcing, sharpening due diligence, and driving efficiency across portfolio operations. But for many firms, the process of figuring out which tools will be the right fit for their needs is a growing concern. So we're seeing customers experience a constant cycle of experimentation where great technology is trialed, but maybe never successfully scales, or alternatively, where tech isn't the right fit, but is utilized for too long. In both cases, leaving teams frustrated without the value of those solutions. So in a market where every moment counts, being stuck in proof of concept mode is just too expensive. So today, we'll plan to move beyond the trial phase with our esteemed panel, who's here to discuss how firms can help optimize the initial AI exploration phase to avoid pilot fatigue and ensure that every AI trial that your firm sets up sets you up for AI triumph. So before we get started, I'm just going to walk you through a few aspects of the webinar platform. On the right-hand panel, you'll see a survey open. If you hadn't had the chance to participate in the survey yet, we'd really appreciate your insights, and it'll be open for the entire webinar, so please participate at any time. Also on the right, you'll see a resources tab where you can find additional materials, including links to previous webinars. If you have any questions during the presentation, please submit them through the Q&A module, and we'll address as many as we can after the session. And finally, today's session is being recorded. A link to the recording will be available on our website shortly. We'll also be sending links to the recording after the webinar airs, so you can revisit the content and share it with your colleagues. So with that, let's get started. My name's Jenny Bosch, and I'm a Senior Assistant General Counsel here at Ontra. I've been at Ontra for almost 4 years. My team advises virtually all parts of the business about responsible AI adoption, among many other things, and all of these teams are eager to bring large and small-scale AI solutions into their day-to-day work. So I'm highly familiar with the topic we're here to discuss today and eager to hear what our panelists have to say. I'm going to introduce our fantastic panel and let them provide a bit of background on themselves. So with me today, I have Dr. Megan Ma, Scott Laughlin, and Adam Morrison. So I guess I'll let you introduce yourselves in that order. So starting with Dr. Ma.
Hey everyone, so great to be here, and I'm really excited to share the panel with such esteemed panelists. My name is Megan. I'm the Executive Director of a newly formed lab at the law school known as the Legal Innovation Through Frontier Technology Lab. I always say it's quite the mouthful, so you can just call us LIFT Lab. The goal of our lab is very centered around research prototyping. One of the reasons is because we believe that the technology itself is revealing a lot about the profession. And so a lot of our work is focused on understanding the DNA of what it means to be an attorney, what exactly is the value add, and how we can actually contribute and shape the profession as we enter into this era. So yeah, thank you again for having me.
Hi, everybody. My name is Scott Laughlin. I am a partner at the law firm of Hogan Lovells. I've been at Hogan for 20 plus years, and I lead their global data privacy and cybersecurity practice. Do many things in that job, but I would say that if I were to try to bring any themes, one of the top themes to my practice, especially over the course of the past 10 plus years, has been the uses of different types of technology against sensitive data sets. And so AI is a perfect example of where that intersection is really important, and have been doing that type of work for 10 plus years, especially for clients who are trying to leverage the power of that technology against data assets that they're very concerned with. So excited to talk about those issues with the panel and with the audience today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Adam Morrison. I'm a senior legal associate working in-house for Park Square Capital, which is a private credit investment manager. I've been here for the last 8 years, and as part of an in-house legal team, we can be quite light on resource, and so I've spent a large part of my time at the firm, exploring ways to make our processes more efficient. And it comes as no surprise that AI plays a huge role in that. And I've been fortunate enough to adopt some really interesting solutions that have had some positive impacts on us. So look forward to discussing those and hearing more from the panel.
Great. So Adam, I'd love for you to kick us off. How do you decide whether a problem or pain point is right for an AI solution to solve in the private equity context, particularly understanding the practical limitations of the technology today?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things when looking to identify a potential AI solution is first figuring out exactly what your pain points are. And for us, in my experience, that's looking for things that are pretty, repeatable, rules-based, high-volume tasks that you can really gain efficiency from by adopting AI. And so, we have never looked at a sort of one-stop shop approach. We've been quite modular in the solutions that we've looked at, really focusing on exactly what are our goals and what are we looking to achieve through the use of AI. And I'll give you a couple of off the top examples. We've looked at systems that implement AI and focus on legal spend management, which focus on invoice reviewing using AI. We've partnered with the Ontra team to look at things that like side letter management and MFN elections. So really specific use cases, and I think that's where we're seeing the greatest value today.
Great. So once you've identified a promising solution, Megan, how would you advise businesses to design or phase an effective pilot, thinking about all of those factors that Adam and folks in a similar position are thinking about, in terms of clearly setting out ROIs or ways to measure the solution to ensure that when you set up a pilot, you know that you're proving out that it's going to return value to you at the end?
So my response is going to be a little bit different because I'd say that I'm the resident academic here. And so, yes, maybe in my personal capacity that I have historically consulted and advised in these areas. But I think in my day job, most of our work is thinking about sort of the hard problems. What exactly is this technology trying to achieve for us? And it's definitely point well taken. Adam's use cases, efficiency is something that we think about sort of immediately off the top of our head. But to sort of the theme and the topic of today, one thing that we've been thinking about a lot is what's leading to the stickiness of sustainable adoption, right? Why is it that, we're seeing pilots, people see positive results from pilots, but you're not actually getting the numbers and getting the people to actually go that additional step in using it in the day-to-day? And I think a lot of it is because of how we break down workflows as attorneys in comparison to how engineers or other folks in other domains think about the concept of workflows. A lot of the lawyers think at a much higher level, and I think a lot of our work doesn't have transparent metrics. And what I mean by that is when you say, what defines quality legal work, most of the time we'll say, I know it when I see it. But that's actually very difficult to kind of classify, like, what is this alchemy, right? And I think in order for us to find areas where we know we will use on a day-to-day, we have to have some level of quantifiable or even qualifiable metrics to say, like, this is exactly how I would like to see it done. And so I think we haven't yet gotten to that level of granularity. And this is where I personally feel evaluation is going to have a huge role in revealing some of that. A lot of the work that I've been doing, or at least sharing with others, is we want to actually not only figure out how do different vendors compare against one another, but importantly, how do these models compare against ourselves? We've actually done, historically in our lab, some blind studies where we looked into certain number of legal tasks and we ran a blind evaluation where we asked senior partners to evaluate their own associates against off-the-shelf models and vendors. And basically what it was revealed was that in certain tasks, actually, these models and some of these vendors have outperformed their own associates. And this was entirely blind. The senior partners had no idea whether or not it was a human output or a machine output. And what was really fascinating was drilling in on what are these factors that these senior partners care about. And sometimes it's, related to the coherence of the argument. And sometimes it's related to the advocacy and how you're framing some of these arguments from the beginning. And so I think, to your question, Jenny, in order for us to kind of figure out how we go from a good use case to then advancing that use case and being champions to it, there's a lot to be said about how much we have to understand ourselves and how we're going to repeatedly evaluate the tools and our own humans in using those and using them to kind of execute on those tasks. And so until we kind of have better understanding of what those metrics are, I think there's still going to be some struggle and stepping outside of use cases that are more efficiency driven and actually more value based.
I mean, if I can add on that one, because I think those are really important points, and it is one that I think we see, just as a law firm when we're thinking about adopting AI, or when I'm working with clients who are looking to adopt their AI. One important is, if this is tools that are largely being used by lawyers, we should recognize that lawyers have a way of approaching problems that are unique and different. And it's not because that they are just slow to adopt technology. It's just that they have minds of precedent. They have minds of, this is what has always been something that I've been rewarded doing. What is the area that's going to result in the least amount of risk? And so if I'm going to introduce different types of technology into the workflows, those technologies may result, to the research, Dr. Ma, that you were referencing, may result in a better outcome. But for us to be able to identify, well, what is the exception? Because I'm worried about the exception more than I'm worried about the rule. I'm worried about the scenario where I'm producing something in a case brief that is going to result in a hallucination, and then I'm going to be held on ethics charges more than I am where I'm going to present the bad legal argument, right? I think I'm saying that as a way of generalizing for the community. And so I think, if I'm hearing your question right, Jenny, I think the key is that we have to start perhaps with even a higher level discussion around, when we're talking about ROI, to be very specific about what problem we're trying to solve and how this technology can be able to help as a tool to advance that technology. I think we're far away from the place where, this technology is going to replace the idea of kind of the lawyering, because the technology is not quite there yet. But if we can articulate how the technology can be a tool to then inform the legal analysis and to provide the basis for providing the judgment which AI lacks, that will be an area that I think you'll see more widespread adoption by lawyers or by clients for legal-oriented tasks.
Yeah, those are some great sort of ways to frame the question around, value and understanding what you're measuring and making sure that you're setting yourself up to have a successful experiment rather than, as Megan said, just sort of a proof of concept or just a great idea. A lot of these tools sound really great on paper, and then when you go to try them out, there are certainly many pitfalls in terms of actually testing them. Adam, I'm wondering if you're able to speak to sort of a practical real life scenario of where you've tested an AI solution with, great expectations, and maybe where it didn't meet those, or perhaps you didn't design your pilot in a way to adequately measure the ROI from that solution, and what you've learned from testing these various solutions in your own life.
Yeah, I think we've frankly we've adopted solutions over time that perhaps we're not necessarily AI focused at the very outset, and over time they've developed sort of AI components that have improved the offering over time. So I mentioned at the beginning, one of the systems that we've implemented is to help us manage our external spend. And so that was primarily born out of a historically manual process that we were doing, and the idea behind that was that you have a system where you can upload invoices. There's an AI component that can help help you read through, the reams and reams of narratives on the invoices to help make that process efficient, to help identify flags where perhaps, time may have been entered incorrectly, or for pattern recognition for things that perhaps shouldn't have been billed, or duplication and those sorts of things that just help weed out some of the natural human error. And I think when we sought to adopt that, and we went through a phase of sort of going through our market analysis and understanding what solutions were out there, it was by no means, AI was not a huge part of that consideration. It was a little bit sort of after the fact that we really realized that having an AI component is actually could be hugely beneficial here. And so I would say we went into that exercise with our sort of eyes a little bit closed, if I can sort of describe it that way. And we had sought to scope out a range of options, finally settled on one that worked both from a, frankly, financial perspective. It was attractive, the system worked well. We didn't go through a huge scale sort of POV, which I've subsequently learned is absolutely what you need to do, and I've spoken at the very outset about having specific use cases and specific goals that you want to test, and to be able to achieve those outcomes. Frankly, when we made those decisions, we were just combating and fighting fires to put out a hugely manual process that we needed help. We were growing at a scale that was not manageable in terms of invoices that were coming in, and so it was not necessarily something that we did and failed. It was something that we sort of omitted to do, if that makes sense. And when I've come to do subsequent pilots of new systems with AI, we've been very, very deliberate in setting up a POV that has very tangible and measurable metrics that we look to achieve. And I'm pleased to say that we've done that in subsequent onboardings.
Yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit more about those POVs that you feel have been successful. If you can tell us a little bit more about the goals that you're testing, and more importantly, how you know when a solution is not working for your needs.
Yeah, well, so I, at the risk of giving an obvious plug, I mean, one of the reasons that I'm pleased to join today is that I have a good relationship with the team at Ontra. We've used the Insight product. That is one of the POVs that we were very deliberate in our assessment of, quite frankly. One of the big benefits to or the attractions to using that product was, again, looking to tackle the issue for us as growing and managing sort of more complexity at scale. We have more investment funds coming online, we have more investors coming in, which means we have more side letters. And again, it was a case of how do we improve or augment an existing manual process to make that more efficient? And Insight was one of the tools that we looked at. We engaged through a very deliberate POV to test not only sort of an MFN election process, whereby following the end of a fund close, a number of investors can elect various side letter provisions, as well as doing a sort of sandbox testing of uploading all of our side letters and fund documents onto the Insight platform and performing various analyses and tests to understand that the technology really did what it said it was going to do and what we were hoping that it would do. And we did that over a period of over a number of months. We took our time. You guys were very patient with us, which we greatly appreciated. And it meant that we were able to conduct that really thorough exercise. And, I'm very pleased to say that we obviously continued it forward. We have a great relationship with you guys. We've completely onboarded all of our funds, and, the feedback even from our investors as going through that process was very positive. And I think that's we've taken a huge step, and that's been a real success story for us.
Great. Obviously happy to hear that. So Scott, you're advising someone in Adam's position or any of your clients that need not be focused on the legal space. They've seen a great demo, they've run a successful pilot. What would you say is important for them to consider in terms of scaling and implementation of the solution successfully, whether that be on the policy and governance side, or just sort of general operational suggestions?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Jenny, and I think it's one where I think many organizations are struggling right now, because I think everyone appreciates the value that AI technologies can have to their businesses. In fact, many lawyers and legal teams are being told by their senior executives, how can you use AI to be, better at what you do, or to be more efficient? And that's a direction coming from the very top. And so I think lawyers and legal teams are seeing, hey, I need to explore these tools, and I need to be in a position to be able to demonstrate, that we are using the same levels of innovation that other areas of the business are doing. At the same time, I think the lawyers appreciate that these tools are ones that have a lot of power, but also present risk. And the question then is, how is it that those risks can be appropriately monitored and managed and mitigated over time? And I think that typically comes with some level of governance. Now, in some ways, the idea of governance and AI has become a little bit of a dirty word because it's been repeated over and over and over again. But doesn't mean that it's less important. It just means that it's just like everyone keeps hearing that over and over and over again, and thus it is one of those ones where that repetition can get kind of old. But if we think about what governance means, this is really around responsible use, right? In other words, this is really around, how can I demonstrate that I adopted, selected, and leveraged AI in a responsible manner? And in the same way that you would adopt any other type of technology, and would have to be demonstrating that that is a responsible use. So for example, you're in a manufacturing world, and you're implementing a new different types of technology, you would want to be able to understand that that technology wasn't going to undermine your integrity of your manufacturing process. If you're adding a robot into the assembly line, and that is using, I don't know, a Phillips screw instead of a flathead screw, and the system was designed to use a flathead screw, then you're going to be held accountable. You're going to want to know, how is it that I selected that robot, and how is it that I designed that robot to insert that particular screw? AI is really no different than that. It's just being now implemented in a knowledge-based roles, whereas many other types of technology that had this type of influence were not. And that means that we have to use the same type of diligence and the same types of approaches to make sure that we are documenting how we selected it, the responsible choice to select it, and that we are doing the different types of testing to make sure that our implementation of that technology is consistent with our original design and use. And that means a lot of multi-stakeholder engagement within your organization, bringing the right people to think about these issues from their perspective. And it brings a lot of documentation to the table. It's almost as you're trying to show and demonstrate your work as to how is it that you have deployed technology to meet all of these various legal obligations or different types of policy considerations.
So I think you did a great job highlighting, I think, what it weighs heavy, I think, on the minds of a lot of stakeholders in terms of the risks associated with implementing AI technology, or at least the perceived risks. So I'm wondering how AI champions can effectively communicate the value of these initiatives to their senior leadership, or in the case of private equity, private asset managers, their investors, their LPs, who might be worried or skeptical about the risks that these solutions might pose, particularly around privacy, confidentiality, accuracy. Adam, Megan, not sure if you have something that you, in your experience, that you think would be helpful to share with the audience.
I have a little bit more of a sci-fi one, I'd say. There are a couple of tools that are available out there now that are team tests, but I might yield the floor first to Adam before we head into the realm of sci-fi. Just because I know that, Adam, you are boots on the ground. So at least from the lab perspective, I can introduce sort of some new things that are maybe coming to the market very soon.
Yeah, sure. And I think I'll probably jump off the back of what, Scott has sort of very well put there, and governance is hugely important. I think AI is obviously very popular and very topical right now, and AI is plugged into a number of different solutions. And I think one of the most popular ones now is obviously generative AI, right? So things like ChatGPT and Microsoft's Copilot, they're actually both systems and platforms that we utilize at Park Square. And they also similarly went through a very rigorous process of ensuring of testing and ensuring that they were safe for use. And I think the question is, the question can often be misplaced in saying, is AI safe? And perhaps the question is better asked is your business environment safe for AI? It's just probably a different way of framing it. And I think one very good way of trying to mitigate that risk and communicate to the senior business team on the one hand, or depending on the solution, investors on the other hand, to communicate the safeguards and the safety of it is having sandbox environments. So for those generative AI models and platforms, I think it's very crucial that one of the ways that they get better over time is that they learn from the data that's input in them. But if you're doing it from a private corporate perspective, you obviously don't want your private data being used to train public models that is available for everyone. And so sandboxing is a way to sort of agree with those providers to just make sure that all of your company's data that you input is contained within that sandbox. And that's something, it's a very strong control that we've been very clear in adopting and using those two platforms in particular. And then it's once you've gone through those processes, you've tested it, make sure it works, you can then roll it out, which we've managed to do, and it helps sort of free people up. And to Scott's point, it's sort of the accessibility and making it pretty easy to use. AI has talked about how it makes our lives easier in doing things, but at the same time, if you want that adoption and uptake internally, it itself has to be easy to use. And so if you put those sort of control frameworks in place, then that goes a long way to help contribute to that.
Yeah, so one thing that has been quite interesting in our space when we talk about risk mitigation is this idea of simulation testing. And so there's a company known as Guardrails AI at the moment, and they have a product known as Snow Globe. And what's really interesting is that they kind of wed together this notion of perceived risk and verify what is actual risk in following the simulation testing. And a lot of this was derived from self-driving cars. And so obviously I'm based out in the West Coast, and there's quite a few self-driving cars around here that's extended all across the Bay Area. But before they were, still in testing and they were prepared to be deployed, they used this methodology known as simulation testing, where they created actually virtual cities and tested how these cars in a kind of city that was sort of like one-to-one of what it's like to deploy in the Bay Area would look like. And they were testing against factors, like what are sort of catastrophic risks that could happen, if we had these cars against human drivers. And the results of this kind of methodology had illuminated what's the long tail of risk here, things that are maybe the unknown unknowns. And so the team over at Guardrails AI at the moment right now is bringing simulation testing into the generative AI space. And the really fascinating part is that we actually have a very clear idea of what we believe are the risks associated with using generative AI in the legal profession. And so, for example, questions around confidentiality are very sort of top of mind. And so you can plug in basically confidentiality as something to evaluate or test through simulation testing. You put it onto their platform. And what happens is that it generates thousands of scenarios with thousands of different personas that might be interacting with the tool. And all you have to do is sort of put in the API of that particular model or any platform that you're using. You enumerate your risks, and then what outputs is realistic scenarios of how these engagements could happen. And so then the team that is evaluating the platform, they could say, oh, actually, this might not be as much of a concern as I had thought in my mind. What really is, a risk that is being played out here based on these simulated scenarios and the personas that are in these scenarios is maybe a question of helpfulness or utility. Maybe those things are dialed down in comparison to our risk of like confidentiality here. And so what simulation testing does, it actually helps you verify whether or not your perceived risks are your actual risks. And also it kind of illuminates risks that weren't in your purview. And so these are some areas that I think are going to be really interesting because it will couple perfectly with your AI governance and any policies internal to your firm that you can almost verify and test, whether your policies are evolving with the way that you are implementing your tools.
Yeah, Scott, I'd love to know if you're seeing in your practice clients adopting similar tools to what Megan was describing. Maybe it's still a bit in the realm of sci-fi, so not as generally available, but sounds very cool and useful. I think that the way that people think about the risks associated with AI are changing rapidly. I mean, I think Adam really nailed that point that, it's not so much about the risk of using the tool itself, but how you're using it, what you're putting into it, what you're expecting to get out of it, how you're using it. So when your clients are thinking about piloting a new tool, what are some other areas of risk or other protections that you'd advise them to put in place to make sure that not only is their pilot going to be successful because they have great metrics, they are really clearly defining their objectives, but also they're not putting their entire company at risk by putting all of their company secrets into an unsafe environment.
You think you have that exactly right, Jenny, and appreciate, Dr. Ma, your perspective on some of the tooling that's out there. At least in my experience, we're kind of probably far away yet from the adoption of those types of tools, maybe because they don't even know that they're available. But I think that's the world that we're headed toward, especially as you start thinking about, what can, how lawyers would be thinking about the uses of these types of technologies. And, I'm going to think about the law here really in two different frames. One is the new AI-oriented laws, which are very much going to be focused on these types of questions. They're going to be focused on safety. They're going to be focused on explainability. They're going to be focused on kind of areas surrounding how you are detecting and addressing bias. And those are going to be very much focused on how I'm looking at a tool and say, how is this designed to work? And can I be able to articulate how we have managed the risks associated with that design? And then importantly, how is the tool not designed to work? And what are the temptations or incentives for people to use the tool in those ways when it wasn't designed to use for that purpose? And I think that is a long list, in some ways creates lots of different types of exposure and really and reinforces the need to be thinking about these issues critically in the very beginning. But that's only really half of the laws, and by volume, it's actually a small fragment. Because really what we're thinking about here is the application of a much larger body of law that will apply universally to all different types of technology, AI just being the latest iteration of that. And so if you just go back to your first year torts class and think about, well, what is negligence in the context of AI? You are going to be going back to the position of, well, what is reasonable? What would a reasonable organization do? And would that be to articulate the risks that I can be mindful of, or to be using these types of tools that Dr. Ma, you were referencing to articulate, well, you actually think that's your rule, your risk, but your risk is elsewhere. And as you can imagine, both the plaintiff's bar and the defense bar is going to have very different views of where those two tensions are going to come together and how to be able to sort through them. But we have a lot of learning to do to even get there. And frankly, we have a judicial system that's not yet well positioned to even understand how those types of issues are going to be resolved. And so where does that leave us? That leaves us in a position of, hey, I may not get the right answer, but I know that I have to do the work to any case. Like it's going back to, your high school math class where in order for me to be able to get an A, I had to prove that X equals Y. But even if I couldn't prove X equals Y, I still got credit for getting close, right? I showed all of the pages and pages of my work. That, I feel, is where we are right now. And to be able to show that work really underscores the need for that governance program, that critical thought, that be able to articulate what is the technology, how am I going to design to use the technology, how am I going to address the risks while maximizing the benefits. All of the themes that Adam and Megan, you guys are both pointing out as part of your adoption and study of these issues.
Yeah, I would have to imagine that a lot of those thoughtful planning steps, goal setting, really being detailed about how you're planning to perform a POV or a POC and how you're going to run your pilot can only help an organization show that they were, doing their work in terms of protecting their data, their clients' data, or the information that they have in their possession. So I would like maybe to take a step into the sci-fi direction with a question for Dr. Ma. At the foundational model level, it's just such a fast-moving and ever-changing landscape. I'm curious what you think will look different in the next few years, particularly with an eye towards how folks adopting AI technology now can make sure they're not picking a solution that might become obsolete in the near future. And maybe that's a difficult thing to know right now, but I would love if you have any perspective on that.
Thanks, Jane. Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, Gemini 3 came out yesterday, and people are already sort of testing out to see how well it performs relative to, say, GPT 5.1. You're definitely correct that almost every day you're going to hear news about how these foundation models are improving. But what's interesting is that people do not really even necessarily know beyond the fact that a model might respond more quickly than another model. So for example, the non-reasoning models will give you those rapid responses, right? And the reasoning models are built to be thinking more deeply, or they're trained on some more logically driven questions, such as the math and like the logic tests that they're built on. So some of the sort of traditional, like what OpenAI had done a while back, the O1, O3 models. I think at the end of the day, it's not really down to whether or not you need to select a particular model and kind of stick with it and kind of keep abreast of these like new technologies. What it is that if you're building the layer on top of these models, that you should ensure for model agnostic construction. I think a lot of what we're going to see is that it's going to behave in a very like plug and play kind of manner, where these models, these companies are kind of accelerate at their own pace, and other sort of vendors, they have to consider what are the other variables that these model companies don't necessarily have the time to think about. And for example, particularly in spaces of finance or legal, these are highly specialized domains of the knowledge industry. And there's a lot of these kinds of ecosystem questions or infrastructure obstacles, especially in the legal profession. It's still very much tethered towards, I do things my way versus what's the kind of underlying standard. All of these kinds of questions around, maybe context engineering or all, again, things that are outside of the model, those are things that vendors should be thinking more about or thinking more deeply about. How do you kind of balance between building a higher quality standard versus hyper personalization? So this is something we think about sometimes where a lot of the partners that we work with, they say, this model's really good at producing like this quality of a response, but it's not quite how I would address it. We had this study where we asked 12 partners kind of to give their feedback on a contract, and we got 12 entirely polar responses for entirely different reasons. And I think some of these nuances need to be captured in some way. And so vendors should be focused on how do you capture the nuance of the profession, whereas at the end of the day, I think the model companies are just going to improve on their internal performance for these models. They're going to kind of look at the broad and wide. They're not going to look at kind of these narrow domains and how to accelerate expertise in these narrow domains.
Really interesting and very, I think, sometimes hard to think about the technology we're using at such a high level. I think we're very focused on the specific tool for the specific solution, the thing that I'm buying today. So I think it's great to sort of keep that higher perspective about where the industry is going, so that we can, I think the real winners here are going to be the people who really understand what the technology does at a more fundamental level than, oh, I'm buying the solution that reads and summarizes my emails. So I'm curious, I know we're running up on time, but Adam, I'd love to give you maybe the last word here to talk about any just sort of general advice for folks in your industry, and taking into account the great feedback we've gotten from our panel today about how you can confidently experiment with AI, safely experiment with AI in the private equity space, and any specific recommendations you have for your peers.
Yeah, I think Scott and Dr. Moore have put some really interesting points forward here, and I think in my experience and my colleagues' experience, when we've come to adopt new models and processes, etc., it's really key. No one can really do it alone. It's really key to sort of have a group of people. One or two people may serve as that AI champion, but it's really important to get buy-in across the business. And it's incredibly important, obviously, to have buy-in from the senior level. And the best way to sort of do that is to really be deliberate in your sort of research and your analysis as to what you want to achieve, what your objectives are by any particular solution that you're looking at for the problems that you want to solve for. Understanding that, and then being able to less so focus on the technological side of things, and more so on the value add or the value drivers for the business. And that's going to be a much more successful way to convince the senior team to help buy into that process. If you're able to communicate how in the case of firms like ours, private equity, private credit, how adopting this system is going to free up time to help support growing the AUM, for example, or detect risks or errors earlier in the process, and have higher visibility on sort of portfolio risk, or I mentioned some of the things that we had around side letter management, making sure that we don't miss things, which is increasingly important from an audit perspective, right? You have regulators that are putting managers under increasing scrutiny, and so that's an important thing. If you can demonstrate those small or big wins to the business and show that how that's going to move our collective objectives forward, then you're going to be successful in sort of adopting these processes.
Well, I think that's a great place to conclude. I'd like to thank everyone for joining today. In particular, I'd like to thank our panelists for taking time out of their very busy schedules to have this thoughtful conversation with me today. If you'd like to share this webinar with your colleagues, we'll be sending around a link shortly to this and all of our webinars that we've recorded in the past, and those will all be available on our website as well. So thank you again, and hope you all have a great day.